Greetings, and welcome to the All Facts Matter podcast, where we push back against corporate media propaganda with facts, evidence, and data. I'm Peter, the author of All Facts Matter. So let's begin. Pennsylvania showed how state polling data can and often does mirror the nationwide poll numbers. But it's important also to look at the contrarian case, because not every state is going to conform to those nationwide numbers. And as AtlasIntel's Wisconsin poll on the U.S. presidential election shows, the states can vary significantly, not just from the nationwide polling data, but also from each other. So, just as the Pennsylvania poll shows Donald Trump up by 3 percentage points, AtlasIntel's Wisconsin polling shows Kamala Harris up with a razor-thin 0.7 percentage point advantage. Now, keep in mind, these polls were conducted at the same time by the same entity using the same overall methodology. So any variations we see between the two polls are almost certainly going to be the reflections of differences in voter positions and voter sentiments between Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So let's drill down into the Wisconsin polling and see if the data will illuminate why we've got a almost 4% percentage point spread between Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So now, I'm going to say right off the bat, one of the reasons I do like the AtlasIntel polls. I like the way that they present their information. Their slide deck method of presenting the data makes this kind of analysis. It's basically very easy to do this kind of analysis. Their reports are very well organized, and they've got some good crosstabs, and it's just very well laid out. And this is also why I tend to invest a little bit more confidence in the AtlasIntel polls, simply because an organization that puts this much thought into presenting the information, presenting the data, this is an organization that takes the data seriously. And in my estimation, that's an organization that's more likely to do a quality poll. Now, that is a subjective means of assessing the poll, but for those who are wondering why I'm doing a third deep dive on an AtlasIntel poll, that's why. They're just very, very good for this type of analysis. Now, when we're looking at the AtlasIntel polls, well, the first thing we want to note here is in Wisconsin, they had to start off with a fairly small sample size, only 932 respondents, and this small sample size is a major reason why we're looking at a 3% margin of error. This is opposed to, in the Pennsylvania poll, we saw that they had over double that, looking at over 2,000 respondents. And when you increase the sample size that much, that's partly how they're able to get the margin of error down to 2%. And this is always going to be true of any type of polling, any type of survey like this, any type of statistical sampling, that the larger your sample size, the larger your sample population, the more accurate your polling is going to be, and the smaller your margin of error is going to be. So, right off the bat, we have to acknowledge, and AtlasIntel is acknowledging, that the Wisconsin poll is a less accurate polling than Pennsylvania, simply because they ended up with a smaller sample population. But the other thing we want to look at about uh, the sample population is in Wisconsin. The most significant political affiliation in the sample population was Republican, and uh, by about 4 percentage points, Democrats were less represented. Uh, and this is quite the contrast to Pennsylvania, where uh, the sample population was over 40% Democrat, with the Republicans coming in right behind at 39%. And uh, this allows us to make a few key inferences about the polls itself. In Pennsylvania, we are more likely to have oversampled. AtlasIntel is more likely to have oversampled Democrats, uh, and thus in Pennsylvania, the likelihood is that the poll results represent a best case scenario for Democrats. But when we look at Wisconsin, the Republicans are the ones who most likely they've oversampled the Republican cohort in their sample population, and as a result, the outcome of the poll is a best case scenario for the Republicans. Now, curiously enough, this ends up being that in Wisconsin, of course, Donald Trump is just behind Kamala Harris uh, in the poll, and in Pennsylvania, uh, Kamala Harris is behind Donald Trump. So, in both cases, it's the margin by which one candidate or the other is losing. That's as good as it gets for them. In Wisconsin, Donald Trump could be losing by more than 0.7 percentage points. And in Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris could be losing by more than 3 percentage points. Yeah. So what we're seeing is when we see that, say that Donald Trump is behind in Wisconsin, or Kamala Harris is behind in Wisconsin, uh, you know, the actual composition of the electorate and what the actual vote outcome could end up being uh, could be so slightly to significantly worse for Donald Trump in Wisconsin and for Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. And uh, the other thing that we want to note about Wisconsin is that this is one of the states where Robert Kennedy remains on the ballot. He was not able to get his name off the ballot in Wisconsin. People remember he withdrew from the election in August and endorsed Donald Trump, and has been campaigning with Donald Trump ever since. He tried to get his name taken off the ballot in the states where he'd already made arrangements to be on the ballot. And last month in Wisconsin, the court said, no, we're not taking your name off the ballot. You're still on there. And as a result of that, 0.7% of Wisconsin voters are saying that they're still going to vote for Robert F. Kennedy. Now, ironically, and purely coincidentally, we shouldn't read anything more significant into it than just the fact that it's a coincidence, is that Robert Kennedy's support level among Wisconsin voters is the margin of difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So, if in theory you were to take all of Robert Kennedy's votes and give them to Donald Trump, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris would be in a dead heat. But of course, votes don't work that way. But it's it's just ironic that that's how the numbers worked out. Um, but Kennedy's presence on the ballot does highlight the extent of the what I've referred to as the third party spoiler effect in these elections. And while we can't take Robert Kennedy's votes and give them to Donald Trump, it's generally believed that by being on the ballot, Robert Kennedy is pulling votes away from Donald Trump. So if Robert Kennedy were not on the ballot, this could be an absolute straight up dead heat between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Uh, this is what happens when you have these other minor third party candidates on the ballot. They're peeling votes away from the major candidates, one of the major candidates, and the extent to which a Robert Kennedy or a Jill Stein gets support in a particular state impacts who's going to have the winning vote total between the two major candidates. Yeah, and when we look at Pennsylvania, Robert Kennedy is not on the ballot, and so Donald Trump's not losing any support to Robert Kennedy. But we notice Jill Stein is doing a lot better in Pennsylvania than she's doing in Wisconsin, and this 1.9% very likely is support that's getting peeled away from Kamala Harris. And if you were to take Jill Stein's votes and give them to Kamala Harris, you see that very quickly you would you wouldn't be tied like in Wisconsin, but the difference, Donald Trump's margin lead in Pennsylvania would be within the margin of error. I mean, it would be a statistical tie at that point. And again, this illustrates just how influential the third-party candidates are likely to be in this election, and not just in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, but in other states. We could end up seeing that third-party candidates could play a significant spoiler role in this election, much like we've seen before. In 1990, of course, if you remember, in 1992, Ross Perot was widely credited with taking substantial support away from George H.W. Bush in that election, and had Perot not been in the race that year, it's conceivable that George H.W. Bush would have won in 1992 rather than Bill Clinton. In 2000, if Ralph Nader had not been running in Florida, Al Gore very likely would have won Florida and could have won, and would therefore have won the 2000 election. So third-party candidates, even though they don't have enough support to win the election, depending on which of the major candidates they take voters away from, can determine not just the outcome of a state election, but can ultimately influence who wins the actual presidency. So when we drill into the demographics of Kamala Harris's support and Donald Trump's support, one of the first things we want to notice is that in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris is doing very well among both Black and Hispanic voters. Now, these are two of the mainstays of the Democratic Party. This is part of their long time base of their voter coalition. And Democratic politicians look to always do extremely well among Black and Hispanic voters, uh, you know, and so much so that when when a Democratic candidate does not get very high numbers of Black and Hispanic voters, that can actually be quite troubling for them. That can actually cause them to lose an election. Um, and in this case, in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris has 72.5% of the black vote. But when we go to Pennsylvania, we see that she loses about 5% of the vote of the black vote, and she loses considerably larger numbers of the Hispanic vote. She's that she's losing. She's down to almost 50% support among Hispanics, and and especially in the case of in the case of black voters, all the support that she's losing among black voters is going to Donald Trump. So every vote that she's not getting from this demographic is a vote that's effectively going to Donald Trump. Uh, Not quite that extreme with Hispanic voters because Jill Stein is in Pennsylvania is pulling 10% of those of Hispanic voters, but even though Kamala Harris is winning both of these uh, voter demographics, for a Democratic politician, these are very low and very troubling support levels for these two voter demographics. And, and this is one of and so here, this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump is doing as well as he is in Pennsylvania, is because Kamala Harris is running significantly weaker uh, in within these two voter demographics in Pennsylvania than in other states, and we see that when we look at Wisconsin. This is far more where Democrats are used to seeing, particularly black voter support, uh, and you know this is why Kamala Harris is doing much better in Wisconsin. I say much better. She's basically tied rather than losing to Donald Trump. The other thing that is striking about the voter demographics is the income levels. In Wisconsin, Kamala Harris is doing best. She's winning in the voter demographics with income levels below 100,000, and Donald Trump is winning with in among voters whose incomes are above 100,000. And this is striking because in Pennsylvania, it's exactly the opposite. Donald Trump is winning in families with incomes below 100,000. In the 50 to 100,000 bracket, he's absolutely crushing it with 57% support. And Kamala Harris is winning with voters whose incomes are above 100,000. Why we see this inversion of income support levels between Wisconsin and Pennsylvania? A poll is not going to explain why that is, but it's it's a significant variance because one thing to remember is that most people do not make $100,000 a year. So in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is winning among the largest segment of the electorate, and in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris is winning, and So again, why how do we get different states with different results? This is how we get that. Uh, another uh, uh, important thing to understand about Wisconsin is the state is proving to be far more partisan, especially for Democrats, uh, uh, than Pennsylvania. Uh, Among Democrats in Wisconsin, only 1.8% of Democrats are voting for Donald Trump. Uh, and in Pennsylvania, on the other hand, we have 8.2% of Democrats voting for Donald Trump. Interestingly enough, the Republican support for Kamala Harris is about the same in both states, 6.8% in Pennsylvania and 6.6% in Wisconsin. But uh, among Democrats, Kamala Harris is doing significantly stronger, uh, and this is one of the reasons why she's pulled. She's polling ever so slightly ahead of Donald Trump. Uh, another another thing to key understanding to have about Wisconsin. Uh, when you look at the 2020 voter coalitions, and of course in 2020 we're looking at Joe Biden. Uh, you, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are basically swapping voters from 2020. Uh, 4.5% of Joe Biden's 2020 vote coalition is now going to Donald Trump, and 4.1% of Donald Trump's 2020 vote coalition is now going to Kamala Harris. So, in terms of how people voted in 2020, it's almost it's not quite the same, but in the aggregate, it does end up looking close to the same because they're basically just swapping voters, um, and this shows you just how close that race is and how close it's likely to be. That while some of the individual numbers have shifted around, overall they're winding up in very very close to the same position uh, as they were in 2020, and 2020 Joe Biden won by the slimmest of margins. Uh, Another interesting aspect of Wisconsin that's different from Pennsylvania is Kamala Harris is doing significantly better among younger voters. She's polling very, very strongly, not very strongly, but strongly in among 18 to 29-year-olds and 30 to 44-year-olds, uh, while Donald Trump is doing better in the 45 to 64 age bracket. Uh, and in the 65 and older in Wisconsin, Donald Trump has a slight lead. But when we look at the Pennsylvania numbers, Kamala Harris is doing much weaker in the younger voters, and she's still winning the younger vote populations, but the percentage margin is significantly lower, and Donald Trump is doing significantly better in the 45 to 64 bracket. Uh, Interestingly enough, it's almost a straight up tie for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in the 65 and older bracket. But yeah, again, this is another thing that's highlighting how Donald Trump is doing significantly better in Pennsylvania, uh, even among the demographics that Kamala Harris is nominally winning. In many cases, she's not doing as well in Pennsylvania as she's doing in Wisconsin and in other states. Uh, to further illustrate how partisan uh, the Democratic Party is in Wisconsin, uh, we see that only 3% of Democrats think that Joe Biden did a terrible job. Uh, of course, the overwhelming majority of Republicans and slightly more than half of independents think that Joe Biden's has done a terrible job. But Democrats are saying no. Donald Trump, Joe Biden is he's doing it right. He's the bomb. Um, we see this also in when we look at his the 2020 vote coalitions that uh, 5.7% of Joe Biden's 2020 voters have soured on him and now think he is doing a terrible job. Of course, Donald Trump's voters from 2020 also, of course, are going to think that Joe Biden did a terrible job. But when we look at Pennsylvania, we see that 11.3% of Democrats think that Joe Biden has done a terrible job, and among Joe Biden's 2020 voters, 12.8% think that he's done a terrible job. So, again, this is another example of how much less partisan the Democrats are in Pennsylvania, and how much more partisan they are in Wisconsin. And this is a factor that's not tied to either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. This is simply a question of this is how Pennsylvania is and this is how Wisconsin is. Had the Democrats had a blitz primary after Joe Biden withdrew in July, you still would be looking at this level of dissatisfaction in Wisconsin, and you still would be looking at this level of dissatisfaction, the much lower level of dissatisfaction in Wisconsin. So, this illustrates kind of the political backdrop of what the candidates are dealing with in the various states. In Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris is up against a voter base that is significantly less thrilled with how the Democratic Party has been, and she's in a much more secure position in terms of how voters perceive her, the Democratic Party, in Wisconsin. And this comes into play when we start looking at what issues the voters care about. Because the one thing to note in both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania is the top three issues are the same in both states: inflation, immigration, and the economy. Now, it's worth noting that in Pennsylvania, these three issues are virtually tied. Immigration has a slight lead, but for all intents and purposes, voters in Pennsylvania are ranking these three issues equally. The next two issues are also the same between the two states: safeguarding democracy and challenges to reproductive rights. But there's a significant drop-off between how important voters are assessing these issues versus the top three. In Wisconsin, safeguarding democracy is slightly comes in slightly more important, but there's still these are coming in significantly farther behind the top three. But we also see that there's a significant variance even among the top three among Wisconsin voters as far as which issue is important. And as we can see, the top issue by a healthy 3% is inflation. Yeah. Again, as I said, a virtual tie in among these top three issues in Pennsylvania. And Where this comes into play is when we start looking at some of the demographic breakdowns, and in particular, let's take a look at the racial classifications. Um, when we look at black voters, for example, black voters, uh, their top issue isn't it's a toss up between safeguarding democracy and reproductive rights. Uh, the black voters in Wisconsin are putting, according to this poll, are putting inflation and immigration pretty far down on the priority list. Uh, you know, you know, inflation is actually well behind, and it's well. Not only is it behind immigration, but it's also behind climate change and healthcare. Uh, so this is this just shows you just how much disparity there can be within a state as far as what is considered to be the most pressing issue. Um, Among Hispanics, we see that the priorities are more evenly distributed. The economy is the most important issue for Hispanics in Wisconsin, and the other four of the top five here are almost the same. I mean, there's some variation, but they're relatively close together percentage-wise. We also, and of course, among white voters, the trend, the ordering largely mirrors what the statewide totals look like. Um, it's This is a different story than what we see when we look at the breakdown for Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, reproductive rights is still the most important issue among black voters, but safeguarding democracy is tied with the economy for second most important, and then comes inflation, and then comes immigration. And but note, immigration is still in the top five in Pennsylvania. In Wisconsin, it was much farther down. Uh, Among Hispanics, the top five issues are still more evenly distributed, although economy and inflation and safeguarding democracy are uh, a little bit more important among Hispanics in Pennsylvania than in Wisconsin. Uh, and of course, among white voters, again, we see that the ordering of priorities is about the same as the statewide total, uh, with immigration being um, uh, the most significant issue by a significant amount uh, among white voters. Yeah, yeah, and so what we see in the between these two states is that there is a you know there's a fair amount of diversity, even in terms of how the voters see the issues, uh, not just between the states but also within each state. So that we do have some very we have some significant shifts just within the individual states. Uh, and uh, it, what these variations show is the degree to which the voter demographics are not the whole story. Uh, and when we're looking at polls, you can't just simply look and say, okay, uh, Kamala Harris is doing well among this demographic or that demographic nationally. And even when we're looking at these battleground states where where it's a real contest between the two, we can't just simply say, okay, Kamala Harris is winning in Wisconsin and losing in Pennsylvania. The Yeah, where that's coming from is how not just simply how different demographics are supportive of each candidate, but how they view the issues. I mean, you know, there's a fairly widespread of partisanship, but also fairly widespread of just political diversity, not just simply ethnic and income and diversity. You know, that we have multiple, really just multiple lines of division in within states as well as between states. Uh, and and again, we it's helpful to remember uh, the the AtlasIntel polls for Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Uh, they are conducted at the same time. These are both conducted by the same organization, and these are conducted at the same time as AtlasIntel's nationwide polling data. So this is a snapshot, not just simply of where the candidates stand, but it gives us it gives us a picture of the political diversity of the electorate of certainly these two states. And if we were to look at it against the backdrop of the nationwide polling data, we'd see that, we have some diversity there as well. Uh, yeah, so you, there's it's not simply a question of she's leading here, he's leading there. Uh, we're seeing just how much diversity, just how much variation politically we have really in the entire country. And uh, this underscores a point that doesn't get mentioned enough, which is that this is why we need the Electoral College in the presidential election system. This is why these polls are showing exactly why this matters. The Electoral College matters because Wisconsin is not Pennsylvania, and neither state is New York or Florida or Texas or California. Yeah. And what is important to voters in Wisconsin is different from what is important to voters in Pennsylvania or New York or Florida or Texas or California. And what is important to particular voter groups in Wisconsin is different from what is important to other voter groups in Wisconsin. Uh, and what the Electoral College does is it compels a president to mount a truly nationwide campaign. Now remember, the President of the United States is the only elective office in the United States that is elected on a truly nationwide basis. Even though the election process itself is comprised of 50 state elections, it's all 50 states that combine to elect a president. Every other elective office in the United States is this state or this congressional district or that congressional district, and only those people are voting for that elected official. Only the President of the United States is elected by the whole of the country. And what the Electoral College does is requires every presidential candidate to speak to the whole of the country. If you took away the Electoral College, presidential candidates could prevail simply by focusing on key urban areas, key population centers, to secure popular vote, and other parts of the country would become significantly disenfranchised as a result. Yeah, and not only would that be unfair to the voters, but it would result in a less effective presidency, because the president, in order to lead the country, in order to lead the government, has to be able to you know, to at least some degree bridge these divides, not just among the voter demographics, but among the states. Yeah, uh, you know, anyone who's going to be president has got to show that they can speak to the issues of multiple parts of the country, as well as to multiple voter demographics. And uh, regardless of whether the next president is Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, uh, their success is going to hinge mightily on their capacity to engage across the ethnic divides, the racial divides, the income divides, but also the geographic divides, as of course the political divides. Yeah, and what these polls are showing is just how many different divides we actually have, and what the candidates have to reach across to be able to speak effectively to a governable majority of the country. Now, which candidate has made the most successful case for being able to bridge these divides? Well, certainly there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Donald Trump is succeeding in making that case right now. But and I'm certainly hoping that he is the one who makes that best case. But we will find out for certain in roughly 11 days. And if you've enjoyed this presentation, if you've enjoyed this podcast and found it helpful and enlightening as to what's happening with this election, please like this podcast and please share it out to your friends. Please also consider making either a one-time donation or signing up as a paid subscriber to All Facts Matter. Your support is what keeps this work going, and I greatly appreciate everybody's support, including especially the free subscribers. Everybody who shows an interest in my work. This would not be happening without your support, and I greatly appreciate all of you. And thank you for listening, and have a nice day.